Billionaire Edward Montgomery was used to having everything under control until one cold night in Chicago he dropped his wallet outside a luxury hotel without even realizing it. But when he went back to retrieve it, he met Grace Harper, an 11-year-old homeless girl with a heart condition who had chased him 3 blocks just to return it. Her honesty left him stunned, and that simple act of kindness soon began to uncover the buried secrets of his past that could destroy everything he'd built. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thought. The Imperial Crown Hotel stood like a monument to excess in the heart of Chicago's financial district. Its marble lobby gleamed under crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Edward Montgomery, Eddie to exactly no one, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite, watching the city stretch endlessly below him like a circuit board of lights and possibilities. He was 53 years old, 6 feet tall, silver hair precisely cut every 2 weeks at the same barber shop on Michigan Avenue. His suit was Italian, his watch Swiss, his expression carved from granite. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had learned to measure everything in numbers and found the equation satisfactory. The contract sat on the mahogany desk behind him, $247 million. Montgomery Labs had just secured the largest healthcare technology deal in the Midwest. The investors were pleased. The board was ecstatic. Eddie felt nothing. He turned from the window and walked to the desk, signing the final pages with a fountain pen that had belonged to his father. The pen was the only thing of his father's he'd kept. Sentiment, he'd learned long ago, was a luxury that successful men couldn't afford. His phone buzzed. Another email. Then another. The world never stopped moving, never stopped demanding. He responded to each one with the same clinical efficiency he brought to everything: brief, clear, final. The suite was immaculate. Minimalist. A king bed that hadn't been slept in properly in years, a wet bar he never used. And on the nightstand a single framed photograph. Rebecca. 10 years. It had been 10 years since the cardiac cancer took her. A rare disease, the doctors had said, as if rarity made it somehow more acceptable. She'd been 41. They'd had 17 years together. He'd spent the last decade trying not to count the days since. The photograph showed her laughing at something outside the frame. He couldn't remember what. He'd stopped trying to remember the small joys and had focused instead on the work. The work didn't hurt. The work didn't leave you standing in hotel suites at midnight, wondering why success tasted like ash. Eddie placed the signed contracts in his briefcase and checked his reflection in the mirror. Perfect, controlled, empty. He left the suite at 11:47 p.m., the door clicking shut behind him with the finality of a vault closing. The hallway was silent, except for the whisper of expensive carpet beneath his shoes. In the elevator he checked his phone again. 43 unread emails. He began sorting through them, his thumbs moving with practiced efficiency. The lobby was quieter now, the day's chaos reduced to a gentle murmur of late-night travelers and staff. Eddie walked through it without seeing any of it. The Art Deco sculptures, the fountain in the center, the doorman who held the door and wished him a good evening. Outside, Chicago's November air hit him like a slap. He buttoned his coat and started toward the parking garage, still scrolling through his phone. A supply chain issue in their California facility. A potential investor in Singapore. A board member concerned about Q4 projections. He didn't notice when his leather wallet, Italian, like the suit, custom-made with his initials embossed in gold, slipped from his coat pocket. It hit the granite pavement with a sound like a single note played in an empty cathedral. Inside were 17 credit cards, $4,000 in cash, his driver's license, and tucked in the hidden compartment, the only other photograph of Rebecca he still carried. The one from their wedding day, when they were both young enough to believe that love was armor against the world. The wallet lay there for exactly 7 seconds before a businessman's shoe caught it, spinning it toward the gutter. Then a woman in heels stepped over it. Then a teenager kicked it accidentally, sending it skittering across the sidewalk like a wounded animal seeking shelter. Eddie walked on, 3 blocks away now, completely unaware. His mind was already in tomorrow's meeting, calculating the variables, assessing the risks, measuring the returns. Behind him, the wallet came to rest against the base of a street lamp, its leather already scuffed, the photograph of the laughing bride now just inches from a storm drain. The city moved on. Thousands of footsteps, thousands of lives intersecting and diverging, like threads in some vast incomprehensible tapestry. And in the middle of it all, one leather wallet containing the last physical piece of a man's heart, forgotten on the cold pavement of a city that never stopped to notice what it had lost. Eddie reached his car, slid into the driver's seat and pulled out of the garage. He had a 7 a.m. video conference with Tokyo. 4 hours of sleep. If he was efficient, he would be efficient. He was always efficient. He drove through the Chicago night, past the silver towers that gave the city its skyline, past the river that cut through it like a scar, past all the lives happening in windows and doorways and under bridges. He didn't know that his past was lying on a sidewalk 3 miles behind him. He didn't know that in the morning, everything would change. He didn't know that the universe had a way of returning what you'd lost, but never in the way you expected, and never without demanding something in return. The photograph in the wallet, Rebecca in her wedding dress, 26 years old and incandescent with joy, stared up at the indifferent Chicago sky, waiting for someone to care enough to pick it up. Grace Harper was 11 years old and had already learned that the world was divided into 2 types of people, those who looked away and those who looked twice. Most people looked away. She sat on her usual spot near the river walk, where the Chicago River bent like an elbow and the tourist boats passed close enough that she could hear the guides talking about architecture and history. Her cardboard sign was simple: paper flowers, $1, handmade with hope. The flowers were beautiful, delicate things she'd taught herself to make from whatever paper she could find: old newspapers, discarded flyers, once even the pages of a water-damaged book someone had left on a bench. She folded them with fingers that were small and precise, creating roses and lilies and sometimes just flowers that existed nowhere in nature but looked like they should. Grace had her mother's hands, people used to say, back when there were people who knew her mother. Back when there was a mother. Now there was just Grace, and the flowers, and the bridge. She wore a jacket 3 sizes too big, donated, probably from some church drive, and jeans that had been patched so many times they looked like a quilt. Her hair was dark and pulled back in a ponytail that she tied with whatever she could find. Today it was a rubber band she'd found near a mailbox. Her heart was bad. Had been since birth. Some defect the doctors had explained using words she didn't understand. Back when there had been doctor visits. Back when there had been insurance. Now there was just the tired feeling in her chest, the way her breath sometimes came short, the flutter behind her ribs like a bird trying to escape a cage. She knew she was getting worse, she just didn't know how to stop it. A businessman walked past without looking. A couple holding hands smiled, but didn't stop. A woman with a stroller paused, considered, then moved on, probably worried Grace was part of some scam. Grace didn't blame them. She'd stopped blaming people for being careful. The world had taught them to be careful, just like it had taught her that nobody was coming to save you, so you'd better save yourself. She'd sold 3 flowers today. $3, enough for a sandwich and maybe a cup of hot chocolate if she could find somewhere that didn't chase her away for loitering. The afternoon was fading, the sky turning that particular shade of gray that Chicago wore like a uniform in November. Grace was gathering her flowers, preparing to find somewhere warm for the night, the library maybe, or the train station, if the security guard who liked her was on duty when she saw it. A wallet, lying on the sidewalk about 20 feet away, half hidden in the shadow of a street lamp. Grace stood up, her heart doing that flutter thing it did when she moved too fast. She walked over carefully, looking around to see if anyone was obviously searching for it. The street was busy with the evening rush, people heading home from work, tourists looking for restaurants, the usual river of humanity that flowed through the city without ever really seeing it. She picked up the wallet. It was heavy, expensive, the kind of leather that felt soft even when it was cold. She opened it, and her breath caught. Money, more money than she'd seen in months, maybe years, crisp bills tucked neatly in the fold, and cards, so many cards they fanned out like a deck when she tried to flip through them. Edward Montgomery, one card read, CEO, Montgomery Labs. There was a phone number, an address, everything you'd need to return it. Grace stood there, the wallet heavy in her small hands, and felt the weight of a decision pressing down on her like the gray November sky. $3 in her pocket. Maybe enough for dinner tonight, but not tomorrow. The shelter would give her food, but only if there was room, and lately there hadn't been room. Her chest hurt, Her fingers were cold. The practical part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive this long, whispered that nobody would know. That this Edward Montgomery probably had other cards, other money, that she needed it more than he did. But Grace had learned something else during her 11 years, that you couldn't become the person you wanted to be by being someone you weren't. Her mother had told her that, back before the cancer, back before everything fell apart. We might not have much, Grace, but we have ourselves. Don't ever give that away. Grace looked at the address on the card. Then she looked at the direction the busy people were walking. Then she made a decision that would change 2 lives forever. She ran. "Sir, excuse me, sir." Her voice was small in the noise of the city, but she kept shouting. She dodged between people, her chest burning, her breath coming in short gasps that scared her a little, but she pushed through anyway. "Sir, wait, you dropped something." People looked at her like she was crazy, a street kid chasing after someone, probably trying to pickpocket them, probably up to no good. A security guard near a building called out, "Hey, what are you doing?" But Grace kept running, because somewhere ahead in this river of people was Edward Montgomery, and he'd dropped something that mattered, and she'd learned that when you found something that mattered to someone, you gave it back. Even if you were the one who needed it more. She was 3 blocks from the bridge now, her heart hammering against her ribs like it was trying to escape. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. Her jacket caught on a parking meter and almost spun her around, but she jerked free and kept going. "Sir," and then, finally, impossibly, a man stopped. He turned around, his face confused, annoyed at being interrupted. He was tall and wore a suit that probably cost more than the shelter Grace sometimes stayed at charged for a month. His hair was silver, and his expression was the expression of someone who didn't like their time being wasted. Grace stumbled to a stop in front of him, gasping, holding out the wallet like an offering. "You dropped this," she managed between breaths that hurt. Edward Montgomery stared at the wallet, then at her. Then at the wallet again. His hand went to his coat pocket. Empty. His expression shifted through several emotions too quickly to name: surprise, confusion, embarrassment, something that might have been shame. He took the wallet from her hands, opened it. Everything was there. All of it. "You ran after me to return this." Grace nodded, still trying to catch her breath. The black spots were getting bigger. She swayed a little, caught herself. "Are you all right?" Eddie's voice changed, the annoyance replaced by something he didn't quite recognize. Concern maybe, or confusion that looked like concern. "I'm fine," Grace lied, because she was 11 and had learned that adults didn't help you when they thought you were weak. They called social services. They made it worse. You should check your pockets. Next time." She turned to walk away, her job done, her decision made, already thinking about that sandwich and hot chocolate. She made it exactly 4 steps before the sidewalk tilted sideways and the gray Chicago sky rushed up to meet her, and the last thing she heard before the darkness came was someone shouting for help in a voice that sounded like it had forgotten how. The world came back in pieces, fluorescent lights, the smell of disinfectant, voices speaking in low, urgent tones. Grace floated in the space between sleep and waking, where everything felt both too loud and too far away. Malnutrition, cardiac arrhythmia, congenital defect, words that meant broken, words that meant unfixable. She opened her eyes. White ceiling tiles, an IV in her arm, the steady beep of a heart monitor that seemed to be commenting on every mistake her body was making. "Hey," a voice beside her. "Hey, you're awake." Grace turned her head. The man from the sidewalk, Edward Montgomery, the wallet, all of it came rushing back, sat in a chair beside her hospital bed. He looked uncomfortable, like someone who'd been placed in the wrong room and was too polite to leave but too awkward to stay. "You fainted," he said, stating the obvious in the way adults did when they didn't know what else to say. "I called 911, you're at Northwestern Memorial." Grace knew Northwestern Memorial. It was one of the hospitals that had refused to treat her mother without insurance, back when there might have been time to do something about the cancer. She wondered if they'd refuse to treat her too, once they realized she couldn't pay. "I need to go," she said, trying to sit up. The room spun and she fell back against the pillows. "You need to stay still." Eddie leaned forward. "The doctor said, I can't afford this." Grace's voice was small but firm. "I can't pay for any of this." "I know." "Then why?" "Because I'm going to." Eddie said it simply, like he was commenting on the weather, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. You returned my wallet, the least I can do is make sure you don't die on a sidewalk. Grace stared at him. I don't need charity. It's not charity. Eddie paused, searching for a word he hadn't used in years. Gratitude. A doctor appeared in the doorway. Dr. Sarah Chen, her badge red, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She looked at Grace with the expression of someone delivering news she wished she didn't have to deliver. Grace Harper, Dr. Chen said, pulling up a chair on the other side of the bed. That's your name, right? The paramedics found your school ID in your jacket. Grace nodded. I need to talk to you about your heart. The conversation that followed was technical and terrible. Words like severe mitral valve prolapse and ventricular tachycardia and stage 3 heart failure. Words that added up to one simple truth. Grace was dying, and had been for a while, and her body was finally tired of fighting. How long? Eddie asked. His voice was different now, sharp, focused, the voice of someone used to solving problems. Dr. Chen hesitated. With treatment, medication, proper nutrition, we could stabilize her. But she needs ongoing care, regular monitoring, and eventually, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. What about surgery? A valve replacement might help, but given her age and overall health, Dr. Chen shook her head. She'd need to be stronger first, and that requires time, resources, stable housing. She'll have it. Eddie stood up. All of it. Whatever she needs, send the bills to me. Mr. Montgomery, Dr. Chen began. I'm serious. Put her on my insurance, as a dependent. Is that possible? That's complicated. Then uncomplicate. Eddie pulled out his phone. I have lawyers who specialize in complicated. What else does she need? Doctor. Chen looked at Grace, then back at Eddie. Mr. Montgomery, this is very generous, but Grace needs more than just medical care. She needs a safe place to live, proper nutrition, someone to monitor her medication. Then I'll arrange it. Are you saying you want to become her guardian? The word hung in the air like a challenge. Guardian. A word that meant responsibility, commitment, caring. Words Eddie had spent a decade running from. He looked at Grace, small and pale against the white hospital sheets, and saw something he'd stopped letting himself see. Someone who needed help, and actually wanted to help them. Temporarily, he heard himself say, until she's stable, until we figure something else out. Grace spoke for the first time since the doctor arrived. I don't need. Yes you do. Eddie's voice was firm but not unkind. Look kid, I don't know anything about taking care of children. I don't even like children particularly. But you collapsed on a sidewalk, returning my wallet, when you could have just taken it and disappeared. The universe is clearly trying to tell me something, and I've ignored enough messages for one lifetime. The universe. Grace almost smiled. Yeah, I know how it sounds, but here we are. Eddie sat back down. So how about this? You accept help because you need it, and I provide help because apparently I need to, and we both stop pretending we have better options. Deal. Grace was quiet for a long moment. The heart monitor kept beeping, counting out the seconds she had left to make a decision. Finally, she nodded. Deal, she whispered. Dr. Chen stood up. I'll start the paperwork. There's a lot of it. Social services will need to be involved. I understand. Just tell me what you need. After the doctor left, Eddie sat back down in the chair beside Grace's bed. The silence stretched between them, awkward and uncertain. Why are you doing this? Grace asked finally. Eddie didn't answer right away. He looked at the heart monitor, the IV, the stark hospital room that smelled like antiseptic, and desperation. 10 years ago, he said quietly, I sat in a room like this, and watched my wife die. I had all the money in the world, and it didn't matter. Couldn't save her, couldn't even make her comfortable at the end. He paused. You could have taken my wallet, you didn't. That kind of integrity is rare. Maybe worth protecting. Or maybe you just feel guilty. Eddie almost smiled. Maybe. But guilt that gets you a hospital bed and 3 meals a day is better than pride that gets you nothing. Grace closed her eyes. She was tired, so tired. But for the first time in months, maybe years, she felt something that had become foreign to her. Safe. Thank you, she whispered. Eddie reached out and took her small hand in his. It was the first time he'd held someone's hand in 10 years. It felt strange. It felt terrifying. It felt like something unlocking inside his chest, something he'd sealed away so tightly he'd forgotten it was there. "You're welcome," he said. Outside the hospital window, Chicago sparkled in the night like a city made of stars. Somewhere in that vast constellation of lights, people were making choices that would ripple out into futures they couldn't imagine. Somewhere, kindness was returning to kindness. Somewhere, broken things were learning they didn't have to stay broken forever. In room 847 of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, a man who'd forgotten how to feel, and a girl who'd felt too much sat together in the fluorescent light, and the universe quietly nodded in satisfaction. It had been trying to get them to meet for years. Finally, they'd listened. The house sat on the edge of Lake Michigan like a memory Edward Montgomery had been trying to forget. White clapboard siding weathered to dove gray, a wraparound porch with 2 rocking chairs that hadn't moved in a decade, windows that looked out at water so vast it felt like looking at forever. Eddie had driven them here from the hospital 3 weeks after Grace was stabilized. She sat in the passenger seat of his Mercedes staring out at the landscape changing from urban to suburban to something quieter, something green. She didn't ask questions. She'd learned not to expect answers that made sense. When the house came into view, Eddie's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "This is where you live?" Grace asked. "No, I have an apartment downtown. This was where my wife and I lived before." He pulled into the gravel driveway. "It's been empty for 10 years, but it's quiet, private, good place to recover." "You haven't been back in 10 years." Eddie turned off the engine. "Not once." They sat in silence, looking at the house that time had forgotten. Finally, Eddie opened his door. "Come on, let's see if anything still works." The inside smelled like dust and absence. White sheets covered furniture like ghosts of the life that had been lived here. Eddie walked through rooms that felt too familiar and too foreign at once, pulling open curtains, letting light flood into spaces that had been dark for too long. Grace followed slowly, taking her medication bottle from her pocket and dry swallowing a pill. Her color was better now. 3 weeks of hospital food and IV nutrition had given her back some strength, but she still moved carefully, like someone learning to trust their body again. "You can have the upstairs bedroom," Eddie said, pulling the sheet off a couch. Dust motes danced in the sudden sunlight. "It has a view of the lake, bathrooms across the hall, there's a landline if you need anything, and I'm not here." "Where will you be?"
"I still have to work."
"Board meetings, investor calls, but I'll be here evenings and weekends." He paused. "Unless you need me during the day, then I'll be here." Grace sat down carefully on the couch. "This is weird, right? This whole situation." Eddie almost laughed. "Extremely weird."
"Good, I thought it was just me."
Over the next few weeks, they established a routine that felt less like living together, and more like 2 polite strangers sharing space. Eddie worked from the study, endless video conferences and conference calls that Grace could hear through the walls, his voice sharp and commanding in a way it never was with her. Grace spent her days reading books from the dusty shelves, walking slowly down to the lake when her chest felt strong enough, making paper flowers that she left around the house like small offerings. Eddie cooked, or tried to. His attempts at dinner usually ended with takeout from the Italian place in town or grilled cheese sandwiches that were burned on one side and raw on the other. Grace didn't complain. She'd eaten worse. She'd eaten nothing. One evening, Eddie came home to find Grace in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. She looked up guiltily. "I know you said to rest, but I was hungry, and you weren't here, and I thought, it's fine." Eddie set down his briefcase.
"What is it?"
"Soup. My mom used to make it. It's just chicken broth and vegetables and some noodles," but she trailed off. They ate dinner together at the small kitchen table. The soup was simple and perfect. Eddie couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten something that tasted like care. "Your mother," he said carefully. "What happened to her?" Grace was quiet for a long moment. "Cancer. 3 years ago. We didn't catch it in time, or maybe we couldn't afford to catch it in time. I don't really know the difference." She stirred her soup. "After she died, I went into foster care for a while, but I kept running away. They stopped trying to place me, said I was too difficult." "You don't seem difficult." "I am when people try to separate me from the only places I remember her." Grace looked up. They wanted to send me 3 hours away, to some couple who needed a kid to work on their farm. I ran instead. Figured the streets were better than forgetting her. Eddie thought about the photograph in his wallet, about running away from memories until you had nothing left but work and numbers, about forgetting as survival. I get that, he said quietly. After dinner, they developed a new routine. Grace would wash dishes while Eddie dried. She'd tell him about the books she was reading, mostly classics she'd found on his shelves, Steinbeck and Fitzgerald and Hemingway. He'd listen and realize he'd forgotten most of the plots, remembered only that he'd once thought books mattered. Did you read these with your wife? Grace asked one evening. Rebecca. Her name was Rebecca. Eddie set down a dried plate. And yes, she was an English teacher, made me read everything, said I needed culture to balance out all the science. Was she right? Usually. Eddie smiled, a small real thing. She was usually right. On Saturdays, they walked down to the lake together. Grace's pace was slow but growing steadier. The medication was working. The regular meals were working. Having a reason to get up in the morning was working. Do you miss her? Grace asked one day standing at the water's edge. Every day, Eddie said. But it's different now. For a long time, I was angry at the missing. Angry at her for leaving. Angry at myself for not being able to fix it. Angry at the world for continuing like nothing had changed. He picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water. Now I'm just sad. Which is better, I think. Anger's easier, Grace said. Yeah, but it doesn't get you anywhere. Grace bent down, searching for her own skipping stone.
Do you think people can come back?
Not like ghosts, but like, do you think we get more than one chance to love people? Eddie looked at her. This small girl, who'd nearly died on a sidewalk, who'd chosen kindness when survival said to choose theft. I think we get as many chances as we're brave enough to take. By November, the house had transformed. Grace's paper flowers filled vases on every surface. Eddie had fixed the rocking chairs on the porch, and they sat there sometimes in the evenings, watching the sun set over the lake. The kitchen always smelled like something cooking. The silence between them had changed from awkward to comfortable. Eddie found himself leaving work early, ignoring emails that once would have kept him up all night, missing meetings because Grace had a doctor's appointment, or wanted to show him a passage in a book, or had learned how to make a new kind of flower from tissue paper, and wanted his opinion. His assistant noticed. You're different, she said during a video call. Different how? Human. One night, Eddie couldn't sleep. He went downstairs and found Grace sitting on the porch wrapped in a blanket, staring at the lake. Can't sleep either, he asked. Sometimes my heart does this thing where it beats too fast and it scares me, she admitted. The doctor said it's normal with my condition, but Eddie sat down in the other rocking chair. But knowing something and feeling it are different things. Yeah. They sat in silence, rocking gently, listening to the water lap against the shore. Mr. Montgomery, Grace said quietly. Eddie, you can call me Eddie. Eddie, she tested the name. Do you think your wife would have liked me? Eddie felt something crack inside his chest, not painful but like ice breaking in spring. Yeah, kid, I think she would have loved you. Grace smiled, small and real in the darkness. That night, Eddie went back upstairs and opened the drawer where he kept Rebecca's things, her watch, her wedding ring, a pressed flower from their honeymoon. He took out a leather journal she'd kept, filled with her small, precise handwriting. The last entry was from a week before she died. If I could leave Eddie one thing, it would be permission to live again. Not to forget me, but to let someone else in. Life is too short to spend it building walls around your heart. Eddie closed the journal carefully and set it on his nightstand. Then he took out his phone and started typing in his notes app, something he hadn't done since Rebecca died. Day 47 with Grace, he wrote. I used to heal bodies, now I'm trying to heal a soul. Maybe it's mine. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. Eddie had known it was coming. The emails had been growing more pointed, the phone calls more frequent. But he'd put it off, finding excuses, prioritizing other things. Prioritizing Grace. Now sitting in the glass-walled conference room at Montgomery Labs headquarters, he couldn't avoid it anymore. Richard Pearson, the company's CFO and Eddie's oldest friend, cleared his throat. Eddie, we need to talk about your recent absence. I haven't been absent, I've been working remotely. You missed the Singapore investor meeting. That was a $40 million deal, which Thomas handled perfectly. Eddie gestured to his VP of operations. Everything was fine. That's not the point. This from Jennifer Walsh, head of marketing. You're the face of this company. When you disappear for weeks, when you cancel appearances, when you're unreachable. I've been reachable. I answer emails within 24 hours. You used to answer within 20 minutes. Richard leaned forward. Eddie, what's going on? Who is this girl? The question hung in the air. Eddie had known it would come. He'd prepared answers, practiced responses, but sitting there under the fluorescent lights and the collective gaze of people he'd worked with for decades, he realized he didn't want to lie. Her name is Grace Harper. She's 11 years old. She has a congenital heart condition. She returned my wallet when she could have easily taken it. She's living with me while she recovers. Silence. Then Jennifer spoke carefully. Eddie, that's very generous of you. But why is she your responsibility? Because she needs help and I can provide it. There are organizations for that. Charities. Foster care. Foster care failed her. The system failed her. She was living on the streets. And you're trying to save her. Richard's tone was gentle but pointed. Eddie, we know you're still processing Rebecca's death. This has nothing to do with Rebecca. Doesn't it? Richard stood up, walking to the window. You couldn't save your wife. Now you've found a sick child to rescue. It's textbook grief response, Eddie, and it's affecting the company. Eddie felt anger rise in his chest, hot and unfamiliar. He'd spent so long keeping everything controlled, everything measured, that the emotion felt foreign and overwhelming. The company is fine, for now, but the board is concerned. The shareholders are asking questions, and when I can't explain where our CEO is or why he's playing guardian to a street kid, Richard stopped. I'm sorry, that came out wrong. Did it? Eddie stood up, because it sounded like you meant it. Jennifer pulled up something on her tablet. Eddie, the optics are bad. There are already rumors online. Some blogger is suggesting this is a PR stunt. Others are questioning your motivations. One article outright accused you of having a white savior complex. I don't care about articles. You should. Montgomery Labs is a publicly traded company. Our reputation matters. Your reputation matters. She slid the tablet across the table. You need to address this. Either commit to making her your legal ward, go through proper channels, hire a lawyer, make it official, or step back and let the appropriate services handle it. Eddie looked at the tablet. The articles were exactly as bad as she'd described. Photos of him and Grace walking by the lake, obviously taken with a long lens. Speculation about his motives. Comments from strangers who knew nothing about either of them, making judgments about kindness like it was something that needed to be audited and approved. What do you want me to do? Eddie asked quietly. Choose, Richard said. The company, or the girl. Eddie drove back to the lake house in silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. The city gave way to suburbs, gave way to trees and water. His phone buzzed continuously. More emails, more meetings, more demands for his attention. He turned it off. Grace was in the kitchen when he arrived, making grilled cheese sandwiches. She'd gotten good at them. Crispy on both sides, cheese melted perfectly. She looked up when he came in, and her smile faded. What happened? Nothing. Board meeting. He loosened his tie. How was your day, Eddie? Her voice was firm. What happened? He told her. All of it. The concerns, the accusations, the ultimatum that wasn't quite an ultimatum but felt like one anyway. Grace listened quietly, then turned off the stove. You should choose the company. What? They're right. I'm not your responsibility. You have a business, people who depend on you. I'm just, don't. Eddie's voice was sharp. Don't finish that sentence. It's true though. I'm a complication you don't need. You were doing me a favor, and now it's costing you. It's not a favor. Eddie sat down at the kitchen table. That's what I've been trying to tell them. This isn't charity, or guilt, or some grief response. You know what you are, Grace. She shook her head. You're the first thing I've cared about in 10 years. The first morning I've woken up and wanted to wake up. The first time I felt like maybe I'm not just a machine that processes money and makes decisions. He looked at her. You're the first thing that's felt real. Grace's eyes filled with tears. But if it costs you everything, then I'll figure something else out. But I'm not sending you back. Not to foster care. Not to the streets. Not anywhere. Eddie pulled out his phone, turned it back on and started typing. You know what, they want me to make it official. Fine, I'll make it official. He called his lawyer, then his accountant, then a family court attorney he'd never needed before but would need now. By the end of the evening, the process was in motion. Official guardianship paperwork, background checks, home studies, all the bureaucratic machinery that turned kindness into something the system could understand and approve. Grace sat across from him, the grilled cheese forgotten. You're really doing this? I'm really doing this. Why? Eddie looked at the photograph of Rebecca he'd finally brought down from the bedroom, now sitting on the mantel where it belonged. Because 10 years ago, I made my wife a promise. I told her I'd keep living, even after she was gone. But I didn't. I just existed, worked, made money that didn't matter. He turned to Grace. You gave me back something I thought was lost. Not my wallet, my reason. Grace wiped her eyes. That's a lot of pressure to put on a kid. Eddie almost laughed. You're right, forget I said that. How about this instead? I'm doing it because you make better grilled cheese than I do, and I'm tired of burning everything. This time Grace did laugh, small and wet but real. That night, Eddie sat at his desk and opened his laptop. He started typing, not an email to the board, not a press release, not an explanation. Something different. To whom it may concern, he wrote. My name is Edward Montgomery. I am the CEO of Montgomery Labs and the founder of what I'm calling the Grace Fund, a private foundation dedicated to providing medical care, housing and education to children who fall through the cracks of our systems. This fund will be financed entirely by my personal wealth. It will operate anonymously where possible, because kindness doesn't need an audience, it needs action. I'm writing this not as a press release, but as a commitment. To Grace, who reminded me what matters. To Rebecca, who would have done this years ago. To every child who returns a wallet when they could have kept it, who chooses integrity when survival says to choose differently. The world told me to choose between compassion and success. I'm choosing to prove that's a false choice. I'm choosing both. He saved the document and closed his laptop. Tomorrow he'd call another board meeting. He'd present a plan that made Grace official, made the fund real, made all of it something that couldn't be questioned or dismissed. But tonight, he went into the kitchen where Grace had fallen asleep on the couch, a book open on her chest. He covered her with a blanket and whispered, "Your mother would be proud of you." Then he sat in the rocking chair by the window and watched the lake turn silver under the moon. And for the first time in 10 years, Edward Montgomery felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, even if it cost him everything. Especially if it cost him everything. Because some things he was learning were worth more than money. Some things were worth being brave for. The article appeared on a Tuesday morning, 3 months after Grace moved into the lake house. Eddie was making breakfast, actual breakfast, not just cereal but scrambled eggs and toast, when his phone started buzzing. First one call, then another, then a barrage of texts and notifications that made the device sound like it was having a seizure. Richard's name flashed on the screen. Eddie answered. Don't read it, Richard said immediately. Whatever you do, don't read what? The article. It's all over social media. Eddie, it's bad. Eddie set down the spatula and opened his laptop. The headline was on every major news site. Montgomery Labs CEO's charity cases has troubling connection to company's past. His stomach dropped. The article was thorough, well-researched, and devastating. A blogger named Marcus Chen had spent months digging into Grace's background and found what Eddie had never thought to look for. Grace's mother, Angela Harper, had been part of a class-action lawsuit against Montgomery Labs 7 years ago. The lawsuit involved a defective heart monitoring device that had been recalled after reports of malfunction. Angela Harper had been one of the plaintiffs, claiming the device failed to detect her daughter's deteriorating heart condition in time for early intervention. The case had been settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, standard practice, nothing unusual, except Angela Harper had died 3 years ago, and her daughter was now living with Edward Montgomery. The article didn't accuse Eddie of anything directly, it didn't have to. The implications were damning enough. Was this guilt? Compensation? A way to avoid another lawsuit? Was Eddie Montgomery exploiting a child to repair his company's image? The comment sections were worse. Thousands of strangers dissecting his motives, calling him everything from calculating to predatory. Some defended him. Most didn't. Grace came downstairs in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "What's burning?" Eddie looked at the stove. The eggs were smoking, black around the edges. He turned off the heat numbly. "Eddie, what's wrong?" He showed her the article. Grace read it in silence, her face going pale. When she finished, she set down the laptop carefully. "Did you know about my mom and your company?" "No. I swear to God, Grace, I had no idea. But it's true. Your company made the device that didn't work." "Yes, 7 years ago. Before I personally oversaw product testing. We recalled it immediately, settled all claims, improved our protocols." He stopped. "None of that mattered now. Grace, I didn't help you because of some lawsuit. I didn't even know who your mother was. But people think you did." Grace's voice was small. "People think this is all fake, that you're using me." Eddie's phone rang again. Jennifer Walsh this time. He declined the call. "We'll fix this," he said. "I'll make a statement. Explain everything." "Explain what?" "That it's a coincidence, that you just happened to help the daughter of someone your company hurt." Grace stood up. "Eddie, nobody's going to believe that." "Then they're wrong." "Doesn't matter if they're wrong. They think it's true, so it is true." She walked to the window, looking out at the lake. "My mom, she told me about that lawsuit. She said the device was supposed to beep if my heart rate got dangerous, but it didn't. She said we could have caught things earlier, if it had worked right." "Grace, she said the company didn't care about people, only about money. She said they settled because it was cheaper than admitting they were wrong." Grace turned to look at him. Was she right? Eddie wanted to lie, wanted to say that wasn't how it worked, that Angela Harper had misunderstood. But Grace deserved the truth. "Probably," he said quietly. "I wasn't CEO then. I was VP of research. I didn't handle the settlements, but I knew about the recalls, the lawsuits. I knew we'd cut corners on testing to meet a launch date, and I didn't fight hard enough to stop it." He sat down heavily. "So yeah, maybe your mother was right." The silence between them felt like a physical thing. "The board is meeting in an hour," Eddie said finally. "They're going to ask me to step down. Temporarily, they'll say, until this blows over, but we both know what that means. You should do it." Grace's voice was steady. "Step down. Make a statement that you didn't know about the connection, that you're sorry for any confusion, that I'm being placed in appropriate care." Clean break. "Absolutely not. Eddie, look at your phone, look at the emails. This is destroying you." "I don't care." "Well, I do." Grace's voice cracked. "I care that people think you're using me. I care that your company is suffering. I care that I'm ruining your life." "You're not." "Yes, I am. And maybe that's okay, because maybe you deserve it. Maybe we both do." She grabbed her jacket. "Maybe this is the universe telling us we were wrong to think we could just pretend none of the past mattered." Grace wait, but she was already out the door, running down toward the lake, her breath coming in gasps that Eddie knew meant her heart was straining, meant she was pushing too hard, meant she was going to hurt herself. He started after her, then stopped. She needed space. They both did. His phone rang again. "The board," he answered. "Eddie, we need you downtown immediately." Richard's voice was careful. "The shareholders are panicking. Stock is down 8%. We need to address this. I'll be there in an hour. And Eddie, you need to think seriously about what you're going to say, about the girl, about your future with the company, about all of it." Eddie hung up and looked at the lake, where Grace sat on the dock with her knees pulled to her chest, small and alone. He thought about Rebecca, about what she'd say if she were here. She'd probably tell him that life was complicated, that good intentions didn't erase harm, that sometimes kindness and guilt looked the same from the outside, but she'd also tell him that running away didn't fix anything, that the hard thing and the right thing were usually the same thing. Eddie walked down to the dock and sat beside Grace, not touching, just present. "I'm not leaving you," he said quietly. "I don't care what the board says, what the media says, what anyone says. We're going to figure this out together." "How?" Grace's voice was thick with tears. "How do we fix this?" "I don't know yet, but running away isn't the answer. Trust me, I tried that for 10 years. It doesn't work." He looked at her. "Your mom was right to sue my company. And she was right that we cared more about money than people, but that was then. This is now. And right now the only thing I care about is making sure you're okay, even if it cost you everything. Even then, Grace leaned against his shoulder, small and exhausted. I don't want to be the reason your life falls apart. You're not. You're the reason it's finally coming together. The fact that it's messy and complicated and hard doesn't change that. Eddie put his arm around her. Besides, nothing worth doing is easy. Another thing Rebecca used to say. They sat there as the morning sun climbed higher, turning the lake from silver to blue to gold. Eddie's phone kept buzzing in his pocket, calls he wasn't ready to answer, decisions he wasn't ready to make. But for now, for this moment, he was exactly where he needed to be, beside someone who needed him. Being brave enough to stay when running would have been easier. The storm was coming. The board meeting, the media circus, the judgment of strangers who knew nothing about either of them. But storms passed. Eddie had learned that when Rebecca died, the question wasn't whether you'd survive the storm. The question was who you'd be when it was over. And for the first time in 10 years, Eddie thought he might actually like the answer. Grace left on a Thursday afternoon in late March, 3 weeks after the article broke. Eddie came home from another brutal board meeting, this one about damage control, brand reputation, investor confidence, all the language of business that made human suffering sound like a line item on a spreadsheet, to find her room empty. Not empty like she'd moved out, empty like she'd erased herself. The bed was made with hospital corners, her few belongings were gone. On the dresser sat a folded piece of paper, and her bottle of heart medication, still half full. Eddie's hands shook as he opened the note. Eddie, I'm sorry. I can't watch you lose everything because of me. You gave me 3 months of safety, and that's more than most people get in a lifetime. Please don't look for me. I'm going somewhere I can't be a burden. Thank you for everything. You're a good person, even when you don't believe it. Grace. Eddie read it 3 times, then called Richard. She's gone. What do you mean gone? Grace. She left. I need to find her. Eddie, maybe this is for the best. Maybe. Eddie hung up and called the police. They took his statement with professional sympathy, but little urgency. 11-year-old girl, history of running away, no signs of foul play. They'd keep an eye out, check the usual places, but she probably just needed some time. Eddie knew better. Grace didn't run away because she wanted time. She ran because she thought she was saving him. He spent 2 days searching, the river walk where he'd first met her, the library, the train station. He showed her picture to everyone, homeless advocates, shelter workers, street kids who might have seen her. Most shook their heads. One girl, maybe 13, said she'd seen someone matching Grace's description at a temporary shelter on the south side. Eddie drove there immediately. The shelter was called Hope House, a converted warehouse that smelled like industrial cleaner in desperation. A tired-looking woman at the front desk checked her records. Grace Harper. Yeah, she checked in 2 days ago, but she's not seeing visitors. I need to talk to her. Please, sir. I understand, but these kids have a right to privacy. If she doesn't want to see you, I'm her guardian. Not according to our records. Legal guardianship wasn't finalized, was it? The woman's voice was sympathetic but firm. Look, I know who you are. I saw the articles, and maybe you're exactly what the media says, or maybe you're not. But that girl came in here scared and alone, and until she says otherwise, this is where she's staying. Eddie wanted to argue, to pull rank, to use his money and influence to force his way past this woman and up to wherever Grace was hiding, but he stopped himself, because forcing your way in wasn't love, it was control, and he'd spent 10 years controlling everything, because he was terrified of losing anything, and it had left him empty. Can you give her something? He asked finally. A message. The woman hesitated, then nodded. Eddie borrowed a pen and paper and sat in the shabby waiting room, trying to find words for something he'd never been good at expressing. Grace, he wrote, I didn't help you to feel better about myself. I helped you because you reminded me what it means to feel anything at all. You think you're protecting me by leaving, but you're not. You're teaching me the same lesson I had to learn when Rebecca died. That love means accepting that you can't control outcomes, that sometimes the people you care about make choices you don't agree with. That letting go doesn't mean not caring. It means caring enough to respect their freedom. So I'm not coming to get you. I'm not forcing you back, but I'm not disappearing either. If you need anything, medication, money, a place to stay, or just someone to talk to at 3 a.m., when your heart is doing that thing that scares you, I'm here, always. You don't owe me anything. Not gratitude, not your time, not your trust, but you have it anyway. My trust, I trust that you'll make the right decision for yourself, even if it's not the decision I choose. I hope someday you come back. But until then, I hope you're safe. I hope you're learning that you're worth more than what you can give other people. I hope you're taking your medication. And I hope you know that for 3 months, you gave me back something I thought was lost forever, the ability to care about tomorrow. Thank you for that. Thank you for returning my wallet. Thank you for being brave enough to trust a stranger. Thank you for teaching an old man that it's never too late to become someone worth being. Eddie P.S. The rocking chairs on the porch miss you, so does the kitchen. So do I. He folded the letter carefully and handed it to the woman at the desk. She'll get this, he asked. She'll get it. Eddie walked out into the Chicago afternoon. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Rebecca would have called unreasonably beautiful. The phrase made him smile, small and sad. He drove back to the lake house. It felt empty in a way it hadn't since Grace arrived. Not peaceful empty, but haunted. He walked through rooms that still smelled like her shampoo, past paper flowers she'd left on every surface, into a kitchen where 2 coffee mugs still sat by the sink, because he couldn't bring himself to wash away the evidence that she'd been here. That night, he couldn't sleep. He went down to the dock and sat in the same spot where he'd found Grace that morning after the article broke. The lake was calm, mirror smooth, reflecting stars like they'd fallen and decided to stay. His phone buzzed. An email from Richard. Board meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Final decision on your role with the company. Be prepared. Eddie deleted it without responding. Another email, this one from Jennifer. Media requests are still coming in. We need a unified message. Please advise. Delete. Then unexpectedly, an email from an address he didn't recognize. The subject line was blank. He almost deleted it too, but something made him open it. Mr. Montgomery, my name is Sarah Chen. I'm a volunteer teacher at Hope House. I wanted you to know that Grace has been helping me with the younger kids here. She's teaching them to make paper flowers. She told them the flowers are proof that beautiful things can come from scraps. She won't say much about you, but she keeps your letter in her pocket. She reads it every night before bed. I thought you should know. Also, she's running low on her medication. She won't ask for more, but she needs it. If you could arrange a refill to be sent here, I'll make sure she takes it. She's a remarkable kid. You did good, even if she can't see it yet. Dr. Chen. Eddie read the email 3 times, then called his pharmacy. Rush order, overnight delivery, direct to Hope House. Then he opened his notes app and started writing. Day 112 with Grace. Except she's not with me anymore. She's at a shelter on the south side, teaching kids to make flowers and trying to convince herself that she's not worth saving. I used to think love meant holding on, keeping people close, controlling outcomes. But maybe love is letting go, trusting that what you built together is strong enough to survive distance, that the person you care about will find their way back when they're ready, or that they'll find a different way forward, and either one is okay because you love them enough to let them be free. Rebecca tried to teach me this. It's taken me 10 years, and one stubborn 11-year-old to finally understand. Grace, if you ever read this, I'm still here. The house is still here. The rocking chairs are still waiting, and I'm learning to be patient, which Rebecca would find hilarious because I was always terrible at waiting. But for you, I'll wait as long as it takes, because some things are worth waiting for. You're one of them. Eddie saved the note and closed his laptop. Then he did something he hadn't done in 10 years. He prayed, not to God, exactly, more to Rebecca, to the universe, to whatever force had arranged for a girl to find a wallet and change 2 lives in the process.
Let her be okay, he whispered to the stars reflected in the lake.
Let her know she's worth more than her worst moments. Let her come back when she's ready, and if she doesn't, let her be happy anyway. The stars didn't answer. They never did. But somewhere across the city, in a shelter full of lost kids and second chances, Grace Harper pulled a folded letter from her pocket and read it one more time before falling asleep, and maybe that was answer enough. 14 months after Grace left, Eddie received an invitation to speak at the Chicago Children's Health Gala, one of those black-tie charity events where the wealthy gathered to feel good about themselves while writing checks that were tax-deductible. He'd avoided these events for years. They felt hollow, performative. But this one was different. The organizers wanted him to speak about the Grace Fund, which had grown from a private gesture into something real, a foundation that had helped 43 children in the past year, providing medical care, housing assistance and educational support. Richard thought it was good PR after the disaster of the previous year. Eddie didn't care about PR. He accepted because Grace might hear about it, might know he hadn't given up on the work they'd started together. The gala was held at the Palmer House, all gilded ceilings and crystal chandeliers, 500 people in evening wear, sipping champagne and discussing portfolios. Eddie stood backstage in his tuxedo, feeling like an imposter, wondering what he'd been thinking accepting this invitation. "You're on in 5, a production assistant said. Eddie nodded, pulling his note cards from his pocket. He'd written and rewritten his speech a dozen times, never quite finding the right words. The MC introduced him. "Please welcome Edward Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Labs and founder of the Grace Fund." Polite applause. Eddie walked onto the stage, squinting against the lights. He looked out at 500 faces and realized he didn't want to give the speech he'd prepared. "Good evening," he said, setting aside his note cards. "I'm supposed to talk to you tonight about the Grace Fund, about how your donations can change lives, about the importance of giving back. But I want to tell you a different story first." The audience settled, curious. 14 months ago, I lost my wallet on a Chicago sidewalk. Inside was $4,000 in cash, multiple credit cards, and a photograph of my late wife. I didn't notice it was gone. I was too busy checking emails, taking calls, living the life of someone who'd forgotten what living actually meant. A girl found that wallet. She was 11 years old, living on the streets, suffering from a heart condition that should have killed her. She had every reason to keep that wallet. Every practical reason to take the money and disappear. She didn't. She ran 3 blocks to return it to me. Eddie paused, looking out at the sea of faces. That girl's name was Grace Harper. Some of you may remember the articles about her last year. The media portrayed our relationship as complicated, possibly suspect. They suggested I was trying to absolve guilt, repair my company's image, use her for PR. Uncomfortable shifting in the audience. They weren't entirely wrong. My company had made a device that failed her mother. I didn't know that when I helped Grace, but the connection exists. And yes, part of me wanted to feel less empty, less guilty, less broken. But here's what those articles missed. Grace didn't save me because of my wallet. She saved me because she showed me what integrity looks like when you have nothing left to lose. She saved me because she chose kindness when survival demanded otherwise. She saved me because she reminded me that worth isn't measured in bank accounts or stock prices or quarterly earnings. Eddie's voice caught. He steadied himself. Grace left 14 months ago. She thought she was protecting me from the fallout of our relationship. She thought she was a burden. And I let her go because I finally understood that love isn't about holding on. It's about giving people the freedom to choose their own path, even when it breaks your heart. I haven't seen her since. I don't know if she's watching tonight. But Grace, if you are, you weren't a burden. You were the first real thing in my life in 10 years. And everything good that's happened since, this fund, these 43 children we've helped, this moment right now, it all started because you were brave enough to run after a stranger and return something he'd lost. The audience was silent now, attentive in a way that felt different from the polite attention of earlier. "Tonight I'm going to do something unprecedented." Eddie reached into his jacket and pulled out a small photograph, protected in a clear frame. "This is a photograph of my wife Rebecca on our wedding day. It's been in my wallet for 27 years. It survived her death, my grief, and one very lucky drop on a Chicago sidewalk. It's the last physical thing I have from that day, and I'm auctioning it tonight." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "All proceeds will go directly to the Grace Project." an expansion of the Grace Fund that won't just provide medical care. It will teach children skills, help them build futures, give them tools to become the kind of people who return wallets instead of taking them. Eddie held up the photograph so the camera could capture it on the big screens flanking the stage. We hold on to memories like they're life preservers. We clutch photographs and possessions because we think that's how we keep people alive. But I've learned something in the past 14 months. People live on through actions, not objects, through the kindness we show strangers, through the futures we help create, through the choice to give away what matters most because someone else needs it more. He set the photograph on the podium. Starting bid is $100,000. Everything goes to kids like Grace, kids who fall through the cracks, who make the right choice even when it costs them everything, who deserve a chance to prove that kindness isn't weakness, it's courage. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a paddle went up in the back. 100,000, 200 from the left side, 500,000, a woman in the front row. The bids climbed higher. Eddie stood at the podium, watching strangers compete to own a piece of his past, and felt something releasing in his chest, not loss, but liberation. $2 million. A male voice from the back of the room. The room went silent. Eddie looked up, trying to see who'd made the bid. The lights were too bright, he couldn't make out faces. The MC's voice crackled through the sound system. $2 million. Going once, going twice, 3 million. A different voice, female, young, familiar. Eddie's heart stopped. Sold for $3 million. The MC banged his gavel, and our buyer would like to come forward. The lights shifted, and there, walking down the center aisle in a simple blue dress that Eddie had never seen before, was Grace Harper. She was taller, her hair was longer, pulled back in a neat braid. She moved with confidence that hadn't been there before, but underneath it was still Grace, still the girl who'd run 3 blocks to return a wallet, who'd chosen integrity over survival. She walked up onto the stage, and took the photograph gently from the podium. "I can't actually pay $3 million, she said into the microphone, her voice small but steady. "I have about $600 saved from my job at the shelter, but I wanted everyone to know that this photograph, this moment, is worth more than any number we could name." She turned to Eddie, and he saw tears in her eyes. "You taught me that giving away what matters most is how you find out what actually matters. So I'm giving this back to you." She handed him the photograph. "Because you were wrong about one thing in your speech. You said I saved you, but you saved me first. You showed me that I was worth saving, and that's a gift no amount of money can repay." The audience was absolutely silent, 500 people holding their breath. Eddie took the photograph with shaking hands. "Grace, I'm 18 next week," she said quietly, "just for him. I've been in school getting my GED, working at Hope House, learning that running away doesn't solve anything. You taught me that too, and I've been waiting until I was ready to come back, until I could look you in the eye and say thank you without feeling like I owed you something. You never owed me anything. I know, but I needed to believe it myself." She smiled, small and real. "The rocking chairs, are they still there?" Eddie couldn't speak, he just nodded. "Then maybe I could visit sometime, when you're not busy saving other people." "Grace," Eddie's voice cracked, "I'm never too busy for you. I learned that the hard way." She stepped forward and hugged him, brief, tight, full of 14 months of distance and 3 minutes of reunion. Then she pulled back and whispered, "Your wife would have liked me, right? She would have loved you." Eddie managed, "She does love you. Somehow wherever she is I think she arranged all of this." Grace laughed through her tears. "Then we should probably say thank you." They stood there on the stage, a man and a girl who'd found each other through a lost wallet, and learned that the things you give away freely are the only things you get to keep forever. The audience erupted in applause. Eddie and Grace stood together, holding the photograph that had survived everything, loss and grief, and distance, and doubt, and had somehow led them both home. Later the gala would raise $6 million. The Grace Project would expand to 5 cities. 43 children would become hundreds, then thousands. But in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was a girl who'd returned a wallet, a man who'd learned to let go, and the photograph of a woman who'd loved them both enough to make sure their paths crossed, even if she couldn't be there to see it. Outside, Chicago sparkled in the night, like a city made of stars, and for the first time in more than a decade, Edward Montgomery felt complete. 7 years passed like water through open fingers, fast and slow at once, full of moments that felt both endless and gone too soon. Eddie was 60 now. His hair had gone from silver to white. His hands shook slightly when he wrote, a tremor the doctors said was benign but annoying. He'd retired from Montgomery Labs 5 years ago, passing the CEO role to Jennifer Walsh, who ran the company with the kind of fierce competence it had always needed. He lived full-time at the lake house now, the same house he'd avoided for a decade, then filled with life for 3 months, then lived in alone for years while rebuilding himself piece by piece. Grace visited often. She was 25 now, a graduate student studying social work at Northwestern. She'd started a non-profit called Hope Gardens that taught sustainable farming and paper craft to homeless youth, turning 2 of the skills she'd learned on the streets into tools for survival and beauty. They had dinner every Sunday, sometimes at the lake house, sometimes at Grace's small apartment in the city. They talked about everything and nothing, her research, his photography, a hobby he'd taken up at 62, because Rebecca had always said he saw the world in interesting ways, the news, the weather, the small accumulation of days that made up a life. It was a crisp October afternoon, when Eddie received a package, no return address, just his name written in handwriting he didn't recognize, and a stamp from Chicago. He opened it carefully. Inside was a bundle of paper flowers, dozens of them, each one more intricate than the last, and beneath them, a card. You once gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. Now I'm giving you back your peace. With love and gratitude, from all of us at Grace House. Eddie turned the card over. On the back was an address and a simple drawing of a house with flowers growing around it. Grace House. He'd heard her mention it in passing, a residential program she was developing, combining housing and vocational training for kids aging out of foster care, but he hadn't realized it was finished, hadn't known she'd named it after herself. Or maybe he thought she'd named it after what Grace actually meant, unearned kindness, freely given expecting nothing in return. He drove into the city that afternoon. The address led him to a renovated brownstone on the south side, not far from Hope House, where Grace had stayed all those years ago. The building was beautiful, red brick cleaned and repointed, new windows, a garden in front where someone had planted flowers and vegetables in neat rows. Kids were outside, maybe 15 or 16 years old, working in the garden. One of them looked up as Eddie parked. Can we help you? The boy asked, polite but wary. I'm looking for Grace Harper. Is she here? Dr. Harper is teaching inside. Do you have an appointment? Doctor. She'd finished her doctorate. Eddie smiled. No appointment, just an old friend. The boy hesitated, then nodded toward the door. Front desk can help you. Inside the building was warm and bright, art on the walls, clearly made by the residents, some polished and professional, some raw and emotional, a bulletin board full of announcements about classes, job opportunities, mental health resources, and everywhere, paper flowers. Hundreds of them, in vases and hanging from the ceiling and tucked into corners like small promises. A young woman at the front desk looked up. Can I help you? I'm here to see Grace Harper. Do you have an O? The woman's eyes went wide. You're Edward Montgomery, Mr. Montgomery. Yes, of course, she's in the workshop, but I'm sure she'll want to see you. Let me just, it's okay, I don't want to interrupt. I just wanted to leave something for her. Are you sure she talks about you all the time? You're kind of a legend around here. Eddie almost laughed. I doubt that. No, really, half these kids wouldn't be here if it weren't for your foundation. The Grace Fund sponsors our housing program. The woman smiled. You and Dr. Harper are like proof that good things can happen, that people can change. Eddie felt something warm spreading through his chest. Not pride, exactly. Something quieter. Contentment, maybe. Can I look around? He asked. Of course. He walked through the building slowly, past a computer lab where kids were learning coding, past a kitchen where someone was teaching a cooking class, past a music room where a girl with purple hair was playing guitar for a small audience, and then he heard it, Grace's voice, coming from a room at the end of the hall. The trick, she was saying, is to fold from the center out. You're not just making something pretty, you're proving to yourself that you can take something broken or discarded, and turn it into something beautiful. And if you can do that with paper, you can do it with your life. Eddie stood in the doorway. Grace was at the center of a group of teenagers, showing them how to fold paper flowers. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back like it had been that first day at the bridge. She looked happy, not the desperate, survival mode happiness of someone grateful to be alive, but the deep earned happiness of someone who'd found their purpose. She looked up and saw him. Her face broke into a smile that could have lit the city. "Eddie, you came, got your package, and you just couldn't stay away." She was teasing him, the way she'd learned to over dinners and holidays and slow Sunday mornings by the lake, something like that. Grace turned to her class. "Everyone, this is Edward Montgomery. He's the reason this building exists, the reason most of you are here." "Actually," Eddie said, stepping into the room, "I think you're the reason. I just wrote some checks that changed lives." Grace walked over and hugged him. "What do you think of the place?" Eddie looked around the workshop, at the teenagers bent over their paper, at the walls covered with finished flowers, at the window looking out onto the garden where more kids were learning to grow things. "I think," he said slowly, "that this is what Rebecca would have wanted. Not just the building or the program, but this people learning that they're worth saving, that their stories don't end where they started." Grace squeezed his hand. "Stay for the session. We're almost done, and then I can give you the full tour." Eddie nodded and found a seat in the back. He watched as Grace guided the teenagers through their folds, patient and encouraging, correcting mistakes without judgment. He watched as a boy who'd been struggling finally got his flower right and held it up triumphantly. He watched as Grace praised each completed flower like it was a masterpiece, because to these kids, maybe it was. When the session ended, Grace walked him through the rest of Grace House. There were bedrooms upstairs, small but private, each one decorated by its resident, a library full of donated books, a counseling center staffed by volunteers, a job training program that partnered with local businesses. "We have 12 residents right now," Grace explained, "all aged 18 to 24, all aging out of foster care, or homeless. We give them 2 years here, housing, meals, education, job training, counseling, everything they need to build a foundation. 2 years isn't much time. It's enough to change a trajectory. That's what you taught me. You gave me 3 months when I needed it most. These kids get 2 years, some of them will need more, and we'll figure that out, but the point is they get a chance, a real one." They ended the tour in Grace's office, a small room with a desk covered in papers, a bookshelf full of social work texts, and on the wall, a framed photograph. Eddie stepped closer. It was the picture from the gala, Rebecca in her wedding dress, laughing at something beyond the frame. The photograph he'd auctioned, that Grace had bid $3 million for, that she'd given back to him that night. "When did you left it at my apartment after Sunday dinner last month. I figured you meant for me to have it." Grace smiled. "She's kind of like our patron saint here, the woman who loved someone enough to tell him it was okay to live again. We could all use that permission." Eddie felt tears prickling his eyes. He didn't fight them anymore. That was something else Grace had taught him, that tears weren't weakness, just proof that you still felt things. "You did good, kid," he said roughly. "Better than good. We did good. This place exists because you took a chance on a random 11-year-old who returned your wallet. Everything since then has just been ripples." They stood together looking at the photograph, at Rebecca frozen in that moment of perfect joy, and Eddie felt something he'd been searching for without knowing it, completeness. Not the absence of grief, but the presence of something stronger, purpose, legacy, love that continued past death, past loss, past all the ways life tried to break you. "I should go," he said finally. "Let you get back to work. Sunday dinner's still on. Your place or mine?" "Mine. I'll make that soup you taught me, the one you always burn. I've gotten better." Grace laughed. "I'll bring backup food just in case." She walked him to the door. Outside, the afternoon sun was slanting through the trees, turning the garden golden. The kids from earlier were still working, planting something for spring, investing in a future they were finally allowed to believe in. "Eddie," Grace said as he reached his car, "thank you for everything, for not giving up on me, for showing me what family looks like when it's chosen instead of given, for teaching me that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be." Eddie smiled. "Thank you for running after a stranger 14 years ago, for being brave enough to trust when you had no reason to, for reminding an old man that money doesn't matter, but people do." He drove back to the lake house as the sun set, painting the sky in those unreasonable colors Rebecca had loved. The house was warm when he arrived, lived in and loved. He made tea and sat on the porch in one of the rocking chairs, both of them still there, waiting. His phone buzzed. A text from Grace, a picture of her and 3 residents holding their finished paper flowers, all of them smiling. Eddie smiled too, and sent back a heart emoji, something he'd learned from Grace, who'd learned it from the teenagers she worked with, who'd learned it from whoever teenager first decided that feelings could be conveyed in small digital symbols. That night he sat at his desk and opened the leather journal that had once been Rebecca's, and was now his. He'd been writing in it for 7 years now, documenting the slow accumulation of days that had transformed his life from empty to full. Day 2557, he wrote. Or has it been longer? I've lost count, and that feels right somehow, like I'm finally living forward, instead of counting backward. Grace opened Grace House today. She didn't tell me it was ready, just sent me an invitation in the form of paper flowers, and waited to see if I'd come. Of course I came. I'll always come. Rebecca, I think you'd be proud of what we built. Not the building or the foundation, or any of the tangible things, but the intangible stuff, the second chances, the belief that people can change, the proof that kindness isn't weakness. Grace is 25 now. She has her doctorate. She's helping kids who were exactly where she was 14 years ago, and she's happy, not the fragile, desperate happiness of someone just surviving, but the deep, solid happiness of someone who knows their worth. I'm 60, my hands shake, I get tired more easily, but I wake up every morning with purpose, and that's something I didn't have for 10 years after you died. You were right, in that last journal entry, you gave me permission to live again, to let someone else in. It took me a decade to accept that permission, but I did, and it changed everything. Grace didn't replace you, nobody could, but she reminded me that love doesn't run out, that there's always room for one more person in your heart, one more connection, one more reason to get up in the morning. So thank you, for loving me, for leaving me that letter, for somehow arranging for a girl to find my wallet on a cold November night, and have the courage to run after a stranger. I miss you every day, but I'm not lonely anymore, and I think that's what you wanted. I think that's what you've wanted all along. The world has learned to give, and I've learned to receive, and somewhere in between, we all learned that the things we give away freely are the only things we truly get to keep. I love you, I always will, but I'm okay now. Finally, completely, okay. Eddie closed the journal, and looked out the window at the lake, silver under the moon. Somewhere in the city, 12 kids were sleeping in beds that belonged to them, dreaming futures that finally felt possible. Somewhere, Grace was probably still working, answering one more email, checking on one more resident, giving one more piece of herself to people who needed it. And somewhere, maybe in memory, maybe in the patterns of stars, maybe in the way kindness rippled out through the world like waves on water, Rebecca was smiling. For the first time in more than 10 years, Edward Montgomery felt at peace, not because he'd forgotten the past, but because he'd finally learned to carry it forward, not as weight, but as wings. He rocked gently in the chair, listening to the lake whisper against the shore, and thought about paper flowers, and lost wallets and the strange beautiful way the universe brought broken things together, and called it healing. Tomorrow Grace would come for Sunday dinner. They'd sit on this porch and talk about her week, his photography, the residents at Grace House, the small and large moments that made up a life worth living. Tomorrow somewhere in Chicago, a child would make their first paper flower, and realize they were capable of creating beauty. Tomorrow the Grace Fund would help another family, another child, another person, who just needed someone to believe they were worth saving. But tonight, Eddie sat in the peace he'd earned through years of choosing love over fear, connection over isolation, giving over holding on. Tonight, the rocking chairs finally had their answer. Yes, they whispered to the lake, and the stars, and the ghost of a woman who'd loved them both into being. Yes, he learned. Yes, she came back. Yes, they're both okay now. Yes, kindness won. And in the quiet of a house that had been empty, and was now full, in the presence of memories that hurt less and meant more, Edward Montgomery closed his eyes, and dreamed of tomorrow, of Sunday dinners, and paper flowers, of teenagers learning their worth, of a girl who'd run 3 blocks to return a wallet, and change 2 lives forever, of love that didn't end with death, but transformed into something larger, legacy, purpose, proof that the world could be better,
if enough people were brave enough to try. The lake whispered its agreement, the stars witnessed in silence, and somewhere, a leather wallet with Edward Montgomery's name embossed in gold sat in a drawer, empty now, except for a single photograph of a bride who'd loved him enough to set him free. The photograph smiled up at nothing and everything at once, knowing what it had always known, that the things you lose sometimes come back to you, not the way they were, but the way they were meant to be, better, transformed, home.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.